So I am Liliana Real, and this is for my ethics class for a virtue project. And my professor is Professor Badorf at the Walter State Community College. I'm going to make this video kind of in place of a formal essay. I find it a little easier to get my thoughts and ideas out whenever I'm making a video, as opposed to maybe, sitting in front of a paper and having a lot of grammatical errors that just kind of affect the information that I'm trying to get across. So my ethics project is going to be on honesty, why it's morally good to have. And I'm going to start with basically my sources show that I've done reading on my sources. So I have a few different things saved from different sources. So I will start with the source, and then I will continue to explain them and explain what I got from those quotes. So the first one is by Walter Sinnott Armstrong and Christian B. Miller, in a moral psychology book called Virtue and Character. This is from the EBSCO host, so Walter State database. In 2.1, section 2.1, on page 108, I learned that virtues are aspirational traits. Virtue traits are voluntary, aspirational, praiseworthy traits that reflect practical wisdom and moral beliefs and are thus stable and durable. So this is different than personality traits. In section 5, starting at page 239, it talks about how honesty can range over different kinds of behaviors. So it's not just as simple as telling the truth. It can be not just lying, but also not distortion of facts for no good reason, especially moral reason, even if it's just a white lie. Also not to be deceiving. An honest person is not going to reliably and intentionally distort facts by withholding information or telling half-truths for no good moral reason, once again. Then 5.1, starting on page 275, honesty just means to reliably and not intentionally distort facts. So it is similar to just telling the truth, but it does breach further or broad further than just something as simple as telling the truth. Our next source is by Tara Smith, Amy Rand's Normative Ethics, The Virtuous Egoist. This one is from the Cambridge University Press, also listed on EBSCO host. So, honesty is referred to as the loyalty to reality, and this is in chapter 4 of the book. Honesty encompasses more than refraining from just telling lies. Again, going back to honesty is not just not telling lies. Because man lives in reality, he must also conform to reality. So you can trick somebody into believing things, but it doesn't necessarily benefit you in the end when it's all said and done. Especially if you're required to show proof of the things that you distorted or stretched or made different. I also found out that invented goods and facts cannot make a permanent effect on your life. It's just not possible. You can't lie your way into a job. You could lie your way to a job interview, but not necessarily the job, because when you're required to show proof that you know the things that you said you did in the interview, you're out of luck. Page 81 brings out that honesty demands that a person be truthful with himself, because self-deception leads to anxiety because of guilt, self-reproach, and fear of consequences. Then moving on to 90. Honesty means constantly expanding your knowledge and never evading or failing to correct a contradiction. And honesty requires the pursuit of knowledge. This part was really interesting to me. So white lies are a form of dishonesty and immorality, even when they're told to preserve people's feelings and being decent and mannered and just, doing the things. You can tell a white lie and give gracious remarks to people even when you don't mean it. but that is a form of dishonesty. So when you're trying to reach out and retrieve the pursuit of knowledge, or you're trying to pursue knowledge, you have to go further than just the outside, just thinking about, for example, if somebody gives you a meal is one of the examples that it gives. It's decency and good manners require you to not make negative remarks, but that doesn't mean that you have to lie. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you have to omit essential information. You can tell somebody if they give you a food that you don't like, that was very kind of you. I appreciate the thought, even if you don't like the food or if it was badly prepared. And then one of the last sources is the textbook by Schaefer Landau Ross, Living Ethics and Introduction with Readings. So I focused on chapter 10, virtue ethics. Virtue ethicists face many problems with the virtue of honesty clashing with other virtues. This is something I had never thought of before. It gives the example, suppose for instance that you're on vacation and happen to see your best friend's husband intimately cozying up to another woman. Would you be a virtuous person to reveal what she is seeing? There is a virtue of honesty, and that points to telling your friend, but being a busybody and rushing to judgment are vices because it's their marriage and not yours, and poking your nose in other people's business isn't a really morally attractive thing to do. I have struggled with this in practice because I have had a hard time remaining honest but also being courteous. And then on to the next source. This is the last one. I'm just going to cite it. Sources. So obviously Professor Badorf, and then I did some reading about virtues on a philosophy forum on Reddit. But it was just to get a better understanding and kind of choose which virtue I wanted to choose for this project. So I chose to practice this virtue by being deliberately more honest. And I know that sounds very basic, but it's the truth. And with honesty, it's kind of something that you only can hold yourself accountable for because nobody else is going to know if you're lying. So anytime I was telling a story, I would stop and deliberately back up and fix my stretched truth if I stretched the truth, and just continue on with the conversation and try to do it as normally as possible, least obvious as possible. At the time, really almost the whole week, but at the time it was very embarrassing and unnatural for me because it didn't feel like others noticed my self-corrections, but I noticed them and I realized how embarrassing it was. I chose the virtue that I did because I have practiced this on my own time recently, and it was just really convenient for me to kind of tie it into this school project. And I did not realize how important honesty was outside of what I had originally practiced it for. So these readings have really helped me come to a better understanding of why honesty is such an important virtue. So my husband and I sit down weekly, and the 1 week challenge that we decided for myself was for me to try to be more honest, and not just in a the obvious, I'm lying about stuff way, but we have a friend who likes to stretch the truth a lot, and he just stretches it very far. It's rather obvious, really embarrassing. I feel a secondhand embarrassment. And we both disliked how comfortable he was in being dishonest. I feel like being dishonest, even if it's just some little white lies, can be a gateway to bigger honesty issues. And I didn't want to end up with that problem. So I didn't want my dishonest stretch of truth during storytelling to wear on my conscience and other matters that I needed to be honest in. So my goal, just to sum it up again, was to be less preserving of people's feelings, more sensitive to the truth, because we live in the real world, we need to conform to it. I have learned that there are certain circumstances where leaving the truth out can be beneficial, and it kind of has to only be done on a case-by-case basis. There's not a good overarching absolute way to define when to be honest and tell every single bit of the truth, and when to leave little less important parts out. Leaving some of the truth out is technically considered dishonest based on what I did find in my readings, but that doesn't mean that I don't find leaving the truth out in some cases to outweigh the benefits of, well, lying. I still don't understand why it's so hard for something as seemingly simple as being honest to set absolute rules on. Like I said, it kind of has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but it was just very confusing, frustrating. I'm not entirely sure why it had to be such a big issue. Like, I tried to think about it, and I guess it's just one of those things. You cannot set absolute rules on when to be 100% honest and leave no detail out. I mean, aside from just natural conversation and accidentally leaving stuff out, like, it's hard to set rules on when you have to be honest. I also realize that stretching the truth is not necessarily beneficial. Others might see me how we look at our friend who stretches the truth when he's storytelling, and that's embarrassing. I really hope that I have improved as a person morally, and in the eyes of other people as well. Like I said, embarrassment. If I can tell when he's stretching the truth, other people can probably tell when I'm stretching the truth and feel that secondhand embarrassment. My husband told me at the end of the week that there's no point to being dishonest, even if it's white lies. Again, in some cases, I feel like leaving information out, even though it is technically considered being dishonest, can be beneficial. I don't have a fear that improvement might not have occurred. I fear that this improvement won't stick. Because now I notice myself, I catch myself in the act, even after just a week of practice. When I start to stretch the truth, I pull myself back, correct my mistake, and just go on about the conversation like a normal human. But I fear that it won't stick because things take longer than a week practice. I mean, this is something that I'm just going to have to, I use the week to practice getting good at noticing, and then after that, just keep practicing it until I die. The experiences that were memorable and made an impression on me were the times that I was storytelling and I tried to catch myself in the act of stretching the truth. Like I said earlier, it was really embarrassing. So yeah, that was memorable to me. I'm not going to forget that. Even though other people might not have noticed, I definitely noticed. And when I started to notice and correct what I knew was an error, yeah, it was embarrassing. So it's definitely memorable. But aside from that, there were no like big events that were really memorable for me to just kind of practice this in. And I hope that I can use the virtue and skills that I've developed in this assignment in the future. And it's not even a hope, I know I can, because it's helped me to reverse some of my nature to stretch the truth comfortably. I'm now more mindful. I become uncomfortable and even embarrassed when I'm dishonest, even if it's just in little ways like stretching the truth, like instead of saying 50, saying 51. And I think that that'll help me bring back and build up my conscience to a higher level of moral grounds. And I really hope that this training kind of helps me from slipping down a slope of worsening dishonesty that's going to affect my relationship, and because that would really suck.